So yeah, like we said, the structure, the next part of a structure, the next thing higher than a structure is a class. And the classes, they do things a little bit differently. So let's talk about a class here. Okay, let's talk about a class. So a class, you can create a class in the same way, in a similar way that you do with a structure. So we'll call it class, and we'll get rid of this. We'll start over again. We'll create a class, okay? And you can see that went red. That's a key word there, class. And then we're gonna give our class a name. So let's talk about let's continue on with rectangles. Okay, we'll call it class rect. Okay, and then we'll have these same things. You're thinking, okay, so that's the same. We're going to talk about data members real quick. So the data members, we're gonna classify them as private, and this means that nothing else. So if you remember, we did a dot width. A dot width like that. We can't do that if the data member is private, and that's a good thing. We don't want people to be able to mess with the data members, except for through the avenues which we told them we allow them to mess with the data members, right? So private, we have a double width, and we have a double height. All right, we have a double width and a double height. Okay, now the next part is functions. Okay, and those are going to be listed under public. There's not a good reason to create a function that is private. There are occasions where that exists, but in this case, we're not going to. We're going to have a couple of functions. Void, like we talked about before. Void means that they don't return anything, right? Set width. This is a function prototype, right? We talked about prototypes or function declaration, not a function definition. Here is what we have. So we've got void set width, and it takes a double. And then we have another function, void set height, H-E-I-G-H-T, function set height, and it also takes a double. And most classes have these setters and getters. Okay, so the setters and getters do exactly what they sound like. They set things and they get things. Then we have something that returns a double, but gets nothing. It's going to be called get width. It receives nothing. Okay, and we have another one that returns a double called get height, and it also receives nothing because it's just going to return the height. But then this is something interesting. We can do this because we have a class here, and we couldn't do this if we didn't have a class. If we had just a structure, we couldn't do this with the functions in the structure. This is called, we're going to do a double, and it is going to be called get area. Now, unless we stored the area, which would be a really bad idea, which we'll talk about, we couldn't do this with a structure. So the get area function is there. Okay. Now we can do one of two things. Later on, we can define the functions, or we can define them inline. So if we're going to define them inline, that is fine. We can do that here. We can do that like this, and we can say return width. And now these functions, the functions here have access. They have access to the data members, but functions that are not defined inside the class they don't have access to the data members of that class. So basically that's what private means, is only these functions can access the data members here. These functions are the only functions that can access these data members. So let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so we have a double. Its width, we'll call it W, and we will say width equals W, semicolon. That's it. Then we have a height, we'll call it H, and we will say height equals H. Then we're going to do down here, we are going to return the height. Return height, and here we are going to return height times width. Okay, so we've got this class here. We've got functions for it. You know, we'll get into this in more detail, but that's how this looks, right? And you know, we could put function comments. You know, say this function does blah, and yeah. So there's that. You know, we can put comments in there, all that sort of stuff. But here's how we're going to do this. Okay, so this is a class. Now this is important because we talked about this with structures also. This class it's nothing, right? It is a framework for an object, right? Int, okay, so we can't say int equals 0, right? That doesn't work because int is a data type, not a variable. That's the same with these classes. These classes are data types. They're not variables. I can't say rect equals 0, right? Or rect, I can't say rect dot set width 0. Okay, I can't do that. Why? Because rect is a data type, not a variable. So we have to remember when we want to use the class rect, okay, we say rect my rect. Okay, like we've done before, rect my rect. Now let's say we want to set it, okay? So we will say, let's set the height. Let's just make sure everything's separate. This will trip some people up. They'll say rect dot set width, right? We got to be careful. We just named my rect. Okay, we just created a new rectangle called my rect, and we'll say my rect dot set width. Now remember, this is calling a function. So this is another thing I've seen a lot when I've done the help people with their work, is they'll forget this, right? Don't forget this because we're calling a function, right? We're setting the width, and we're going to set the width to 10, okay? And then we'll do my rect dot set h height, set height to 15 like we did before, and then we will say then we'll do this this cout state. We'll cout now. Remember, this is very important. So we want to access the data members, but we can't, right? Because of this data hiding, which is a very important part of object-oriented programming. But we want to get the height of the object, right? So we need to do my rect dot get height. But we have to remember, this is very important. This is a function, okay? So we have to put those parentheses on. Now, because we're not ending the statement, we can continue on without putting a semicolon. And we can do this we'll do this again. We'll end line, semicolon, and then we'll do this for the height, the width, and the area. So height, next is width, and then we need to get width, and then we'll do area, and we will get area. All right, let's save this. Let's compile it. All right, compiled, sweet. Let's run it. All right, so the height is 15, the width is 10, and the area is 150. Now this is kind of a longer video because we're introducing some of the syntax here, just some of the basics of how this all works. Okay,